Hi, I'm Chris, and this is the patch breakdown from my Jamuary25 patch on day 2. You can already hear it play in the background. That nice bass line. And the funky drums. Let's tune it down again. So let's talk about what's happening here. This patch consists of 3 voices. We have the bass line, that's the part, all of that is the bass line. We have the drums. The drums go from here to here. And then we have this doodling melody that's coming in eventually. It's washed out with reverb. That's from here to here. These are the 3 voices. So let's start with the bass line, because that's what the patch has actually started with. And here is the start of the bass line. This is the phase shifting or shifting phase oscillator, and it's essentially an oscillator that triples its waveform generation by shifting the phase of the internal phaser 3-way. And the result, let's turn up the filter for once. The result is this super saw-esque or unison-like sound. It's a decent oscillator that can morph from square wave to saw wave. It has pulse width modulation, and all of the 3 internal phases can be modulated. And I do that with microsines. I need little LFO that outputs 3 sine waves simultaneously with individual speeds and phases. Can be tempo synced. In this case, just slow moving sine waves. Maybe look at one of those. That's half hertz. The other one slightly offset. It's a quarter hertz. Just so we get the phases moving. And if phase is modulated by a slow moving signal, it changes the pitch just a tiny bit, which gets this unison-like sound. If you remove this oscillator from the equation, you can hear that there's still some bass happening, and that's this micro-frequency modulation operator. Let's remove that for a second. Remember, that's this input. This is a sine wave based oscillator that has lots of modulation capabilities, especially frequency and phase modulation. But I also like to use it for sub-reinforcement or bass reinforcement, because it's a very clean sine. It has feedback phase modulation. So turn up the filter so hear that. Turning up the feedback gives it a saw-esque character. Now that's given a solid fundamental, bass fundamental. And we add the shifting phase oscillator on top. That's also 1 octave up. And we get this this nice and rich tone. Both of these are fed into an amplifier. I'm gonna talk about that later. Where is it? No, it's actually just the shifting phase oscillator that goes into the amplifier. At least in the lower part of this amplifier. Gets an AD envelope and then feeds into the mixer. The second channel of the first channel of the mixer. Second channel is the phase shifting phase oscillator. First channel of the mixer is the FM operator, and that is directly modulated because it already includes an amplifier. Those two are fed into the mixer. The mixer has its clipper enabled for some extra beef. You can see we have also turned up the output gain to really drive the clipper. And we have removed the DC offset with the DC blocker. That's just a safety measure. You can turn it off. It doesn't really matter. But it might shift the phase of the lower frequencies. And when I'm designing sounds, I like to just enable that just to be safe. And when it's enabled, I can design with that already enabled. So there is no surprises later on when it comes to the mixing stage, because I have created the sound with that already burnt in. And it's not like I create a sound with a huge bass and then I add a DC blocker and the bass is gone, because it shifts the phase and now it aligns badly with other elements. Just enable this at the very beginning, design the sound with this in mind, and you're fine. Output of this mixer is fed into the amplifier, the top channel. I'm gonna talk about this. Soon. This output goes into the ladder low pass, which is a beefy low pass filter. Saturates quite nicely, and it has a drive included, and we're driving the signal very hard to get this rich and creamy sound. We even attenuate the output level. To give it some space, we feed the output of the ladder low pass filter into the ping pong delay, because up until this point everything is mono. Usually oscillator outputs are mono if you do not have unison or anything that pans them in the stereo field. There's really no need to have stereo, because saw wave is a saw wave. And the only way to create stereo from that is if you offset the phase or if you offset some parameters. But that's not necessary. We can create space with stereo effects like stereo delay, in this case the ping pong delay. That creates some nice space with the delay that's moving from left to right. We turn that down. Yeah, the patch has become a lot more boring. Also, the delay adds rhythmic complexity to the bassline, and that's always good. Well, it's not always good, but it's good if it's a sparse patch like that where not much is happening, so you want to add some rhythmic complexities to the few elements that are present. If I had a bass line that was like an eighth note pulse or very many notes and a lot of rhythmic stuff, then it's not a good idea to add more rhythmic complexity if it's already complex. But this bass line is rhythmically sparse, and by adding the delay, we create more interest. It's also worth mentioning that the ping pong delay has a morphing filter, and I've set it to high pass, and I remove quite a lot of the low end. We're filtering at 550 Hz. If I recall correctly, it's a one pole, so 6 decibels per octave. And I do that to clean up the low end, because the delays might overlay with the next note of the bass line that is playing, and if there's bass in there, there might be some phase issues. And to avoid that altogether, I just filter the feedback path. All of that goes into a clipper. That's a nice soft clipping circuit here. Good amount of gain. That's just to glue everything together. Actually, the shifting phase oscillator and the FM operator already go through the ladder low pass, which has copious amounts of drive. But then it goes into the ping pong delay, and to kind of pull it all together and create some the common ground, I just smash it into the clipper so that the signal reacts to the signal level. So for instance, if there's delays overlaying with the dry signal, it drives the clipper harder and stuff, and that just creates coherence. If I remove that, yeah, it doesn't do much. Maybe if I... It's a subtle detail. Just makes it a little bit more fatter. Here's a micro diffuser, which acts kind of like a reverb. It is not a reverb. But it gives a little bit of space. And that adds to the stereo field, to the stereo width, and to the perception, the stereo perception. It gives the bassline a little bit of room to exist in, so that it makes more sense. So we adjust a little bit of that. Again, there's a high pass to get rid of the very low frequencies, so we do not have issues with sub-bass and phase alignment. Finally, that goes into a stereo mixer. It's the first channel. Yeah. That's just the sound source. The interesting part of this patch is actually how the melody is sequenced. And it all starts to the very far left. We have a micro button and a micro clock. If you have seen the Day 1 patch explanation, you already know what that does. Button, this is my global reset. It's connected to quite a bunch of reset and sync and retrigger inputs, so that when I press this button, my whole patch goes back into sync. Because sometimes if you design stuff, you add modules, stuff is out of sync. Just press this button, everything is back to sync, everything is great. Here I have my trusty micro clock. It's 4 clock sources in one. I have 1/1, 1/8, 4/1, and 1/4. Let's see where... Okay, here. So usually I use LFOs to create melodies. LFO, sample and hold, and a quantizer, maybe an attenuator, and you have a great way of creating melodies. But this time I wanted to try something different. I actually used this LFO to create the rhythm. We have these trigger sync, and that works in a way if you push the button, it's enabled. And it's kind of quick now. If I remove the sync, see the buttons light up, and if I trigger, then the store trigger is released and it's ready to receive the next trigger. And that is connected to this 8th pulse of the clock, and the button, the toggle button, is actually controlled by this LFO. This is Vapor Ripple, that's 4 LFOs in one, and we can mix freely, blend 2 dimensions between all 4. What I chose to do here is I have this global rate, and then there's for all of the 4 LFOs an individual rate, and if you blend multiple LFOs that are running at different rates, you get an ever-changing pattern of LFOs. So let's see if we can visualize that really quick. As you can see, very erratic signal that is still related somewhat to the source. And since this is not a great trigger, because it's way too much and it's not aligned on the grid, and it's way off, so it's not like it's just a little bit of swing, it's just purely random, because the rate is not synced, and it would be a great coincidence if it's somehow in sync, but yeah, it isn't. And to get it in sync, we use this trigger sync. We have the LFO toggle the trigger storage, so every time there's a 0 crossing, the signal grows from negative or 0 above 0. That's registered as a trigger. And as soon as the clock hits this trigger, the store trigger is released. And now if the LFO is running slowly, then there will be less triggers, because the LFO is not crossing that much compared to the clock. And if the LFO is running fast, then there will be more triggers, because more of the 0 crossings happen before the next clock cycle. And what I did here, I also mapped one of the rates to my MIDI controller. As you can see, when I change the rate of this one LFO, I can generate endless rhythmic variation. You could also go one step further, change multiple of the parameters, and you get more rhythmic variations. Let's find a good example again. Okay. I think that works. The rhythmic trigger is then sequencing this AD, attack decay envelope, which controls the amplitude of the oscillator and the filter cutoff. And the actual melody comes from this microsequencer. That was a lucky coincidence. If you load microsequencer into your rack, it generates a random sequence, and I like the first one. And you can set the quantization of these knobs. And here I just have it quantized, so it sticks to semitones in a range of plus minus 1 volt. That makes it easier to set notes and also hones in the range. And that is then fed into the quantizer. I chose E minor as a scale, and I deactivated the fourth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, only the fourth is deactivated. No particular reason. Well, if you think about it, the root note, it's always good to have that in there, especially in the bass line to establish the scale. Then 2, 3, that is the characteristic of the minor scale, that there's only a half step between the second and the third of the scale. So if you have that in there, you can accentuate that it's a minor scale. Then the fifth and the sixth, that's the next characteristic of the scale. To me, that is not as important as the 2, 3, but the 5 and the 6 scale degree just sound nice. So the step between 1 and 5, that's a fifth interval. I like that interval. And 5 and 6, especially in minor, sounds just lovely. And the seventh, that's a little bit of dissonance for this scale that I chose. So that works that way. But yeah, not that much thought has gone into that when I designed that patch. Just disabled the fourth, didn't need it, sounded great, and I went with it. When you listen closely, you can hear that this bass line is not just one note after the other, it's kind of sliding into the notes and out of the notes. And that's what the slew rate limiter does here. I'm limiting the slew, so the rate of change of the pitch signal, because that is stepped, because the CV sequencer steps through its voltages. And to get this glide, you have to slew it. You can also do it with a filter. I chose to do it with a slew limiter here, because it would give me the opportunity to change the slew rate for the rise portion and the fall portion, so that notes if there's a step up, I have a different glide as when there's a step down. But I did not do that here. Just linked it. I was content with the result. I think it sounds great. Let's turn down the bass line. We've talked a lot about this already. Let's get to the drums. Let's disable everything. Let's hear the kick drum. That's just micro kick. This time I wanted to have a kick drum that's not so much in the front, but still punch it through the mix. So not that heavy electro overprocessed kick sound, but a rather deep kick. Because believe it or not, I went into this patch with the intention to create a deep house patch. Well, you be the judge if I succeeded in that. I don't know. But initially I wanted to go for that vibe. And having a hard kick drum like they use in drum and bass or techno kick, that wouldn't have worked. So I went for this. There's a decent amount of pitch dive. So that's the pitch drop, which gives the transient attack. And if you turn that up, you can hear the kick is already much more harsh. But if you turn it down too much, it's not cutting through. I decided on a middle ground. Spice, that's just tone. Just turn the knob until you're satisfied with the result. Overdrive, that's a distortion built in, and usually I drive my kicks quite hard, but again, it doesn't work for this genre. Just a little less gets the kick less aggressive and fits the style more. decent length of the kick, short pitch transient with the decay. There's a decay envelope that's applied to both the pitch dive and the volume envelope, but you can shape this envelope separately for pitch and amplitude. So I went with a very brief pitch at the decay phase and a much longer attack decay phase to make the kick fatter. So very short pitch, just to give it a little bit of attack. Yeah. And since it was still a little bit too aggressive, I fed it into a low pass filter, trusty ladder low pass, set the cutoff way down to 2.5 kilohertz, gave it just a little bit of drive. Maybe let's bypass. Gives it a little bit more character, a little bit more body, removes this very high frequency click from the kick. Just suits the mix a bit better. And along with the kick is this AD envelope that is triggered by the same clock. So that's just a 4th note clock that's triggering the kick with the 4 to the floor pattern. And it's also triggering this attack decay envelope. And this is my sidechain. So usually I would have a compressor that gets the kick as the sidechain and then ducks the level. But since we're in a modular environment, and we have the source of the triggers for the kick, we can do a bit better. We can take an decaying envelope. Doesn't need to be attack decay envelope, but makes it a bit easier because you can trigger it and you don't need gates. And we set our decay, don't need attack here, and the shape so that it can carve out space for the kick. And this is then fed into various amplifiers throughout the patch. Most importantly, this amplifier for the bassline that ducks the bassline whenever the kick hits, so the kick has more space to breathe in the mix. See, now you can hear the kick, and if I remove the CV, so no more ducking, now the kick is fighting. Now it's no longer fighting. And also especially for house music, it gives this pumping feeling because the bass line is pumping whenever the kick hits, and since the kick is rhythmic, it's literally on every 4th note. That's just a 4th note pump, more rhythmic, stronger rhythm. Don't know how to say that. And also feeds into this amplifier that we're going to talk about later for the lead line. Essentially does the same. And what's interesting here, I chose to duck the lead line a little bit less to make it less pronounced, but still give the kick space. But since the lead line is not in the same frequency range as the kick drum or the bass line, I didn't need to have it attenuated that much for the kick to still punch through. So it's frequency balance. I use the second AD envelope to duck the hi-hats and the clap. Let's talk about that next. So there's actually 2 hi-hats that I can control separately. Let's get rid of the fast one. Talk about the offset hi-hat that hits on the offbeat or between the beats. And that is as simple as it gets. I take the same trigger that triggers the kick, the quarter note pulse from the clock. I use utility delay to delay it by 1/8 note, and then use that as a trigger for the hi-hat. So it plays a quarter note pattern, but delayed by 1/8. So it always plays in between the kicks, which gives a nice rhythmic interplay between the kick and this hi-hat. I chose to make the hi-hat very, very dull in frequency, so that it feels related to the kick. But I've gone for more high-end, but a more subdued hi-hat felt more right here. There's also a decent amount of decay, and I shaped it so that it decays quickly. Some attack, so that it is not as harsh. If I remove the attack, you can hear that it clicks in between the kicks, and it pronounces the rhythm, but I did not want that here. Instead, give it a decent amount of attack. What's also helping here is the attack. With the attack is that since it gradually fades in now, the volume peak of this hi-hat is not on the grid anymore, because the start of the attack phase is on the grid, and when the hi-hat is actually heard, then it's a little bit late, which adds to the groove. Alright, next up, well, let's stay with the hi-hats. There's the second hi-hat, which is a bit more interesting. It is fed by a 8th pulse. Coincidentally, it's the same 8th pulse that triggers the trigger sync and is also used for triggering the sample and hold for the lead line, the melodic lead line. But in this case, it's for the hi-hat. Simple as it gets. No trigger sequence, no nothing, just 8th pulse. To make it a bit more interesting, there's an LFO that controls the level, and that is set to half notes. And you can hear that the hi-hat is gradually moving up and down in volume, which adds a little bit of rhythm, adds to the rhythm, and makes the hi-hat groove more with the kick, because it turned down and turned up. This hi-hat is also brighter than the one that is in between the kicks, and does not have as much attack and not as much decay. So it's just a little bit of a ticker that gives more rhythm. And to increase the rhythmic complexity, I have it routed through this delay. This delay that is set on 3/16, and that helps to make the hi-hat pattern sound a lot more complex than it actually is. I unfortunately cannot solo the hi-hat. Can remove the bass line. Let's keep the kick disconnected for a second. And if I remove the delay, it's literally the 8th notes. But if I add a little bit of delay, decent amount of feedback, it's filtered quite a bit. And then it plays more notes without playing more notes. Yeah, if that makes sense. That's a neat little trick I like to do, because you can get very intricate hi-hat patterns from just a simple pulsing hi-hat. So if I change the delay time, well, it doesn't edge much if the delay time is a multiple of the pulse frequency, but if you have dotted notes, or thirds, then it adds a lot to the rhythm. Another low-pass filter for this hi-hat, because I wanted it to be a bit more subdued. As you can see, it's poking out if I disable this low-pass filter, and that did not fit. So a little bit of low-pass to remove high frequencies and make it fit more with the drums. Let's take that out and finally talk about the clap. Currently, we do not have a dedicated clap module, so there's no micro clap. We're working on that. It's not quite there. But for the deep house vibe I was initially going for, I wanted a clap, because snare drum, while it works, it was kind of too much. The snare, that's a clear transient and it's fighting with the kick. I wanted to have just a little bit of a noise burst that reminds me of clap. And to get a clap, you can actually do some neat little tricks. That's what I did here. I use a lo-fi delay, and I do not use that for any of its features besides being a very standard delay that does not do much to the signal. I delay by a very brief time, 32 milliseconds, and I add some feedback, and what that does, let's okay, the bar scope isn't fast enough to show that, but what that does in theory, you just have to believe me here, is it re-triggers the AD envelope that is triggered by the trigger that is processed through this lo-fi delay. Because a trigger signal is just a short impulse, and if you delay that, you delay the impulse. If you mix that with the original signal, you have a copy. So you have the original and the delayed copy. And if you add feedback, the delayed copy is fed back and you have a multiple of it. So that's a neat little trick to get short bursts of triggers. You can do that with a delay. And that's what's creating the clap sound. It's just a few short AD envelopes. Because if you think of a crowd clapping, people clap and they are not in sync, they are slightly offset. And that's what this ratcheting AD envelope is doing. And that just goes directly into micro noise and has a built-in amplifier. If I remove the kick, you can actually hear the short flutter at the start that makes it a clap sound. And it's not the best clap sound in the world, but it works in this context. With micro noise, I have lots of shaping capabilities. Here I turned the color slider for pink noise. White noise, too harsh. Blue noise, also too harsh. Could have worked. I started out with this actually and tried to filter it down. But in the end I decided to go for pink noise. Still added low pass filter and also high pass filter to make space for the kick, so that the noise does not overlay the lower end and create rumble. Just cleaned that right up, added the envelope, and it was good to go. Without the clap, a lot more boring. With the clap. Now that's better. Alright, let's remove the drums. And let's finally talk about the melodic interest of the patch. That's this thing here. So here, another instance of Vapor Ripper. This case, however, it does not generate triggers. I use that to write the melody that the lead line is playing. So what's happening here? I have again a setup of 4 LFOs that I blend right in between. I chose just sine waves. Could have actually done other stuff. Also choose a random waveform. But I was happy with the sine waves. Sometimes the simple things just get you where you need to be. Here I also created more interesting output by giving each of the LFO different rates so that they are not in sync, and that creates a pseudo-endless stream of modulation that is repeating whenever. Like if you multiply all of the frequencies and you find the common divisor, that's where this will repeat. But since these are all very odd ratios, fractional ratios, it does not repeat in a long time. And this way I also do not reset this here. Forgot to mention that here with the trigger LFO, that actually gets reset every whole bar, so that the baseline does not feel random. If I did not reset that, let's do that really quick. Sounds interesting, but there's no coherence anymore. What I've learned with random generation, generate random triggers, generate random rhythms, generate random melodies, is that you need some static elements that kind of hold everything together. So here I create random triggers, but I reset that every bar so that I have a random trigger sequence, but it repeats periodically. And that just gives it that steadiness that pulls it together. And especially drums, kick drum especially, or bass line, that's elements that can hold the focus on the rhythm and the melodic integrity of the patch. So if you have other elements that are a little bit random, they can be random. That does not matter as much. The patch still does not sound erratic or incoherent, because you have the bass line and the bass drum, and maybe the snare or clap in that case, that hold the rhythmic fundamental, the rhythmic bass and the melodic bass of the patch. And all of the other stuff just evolves around that. So as you can see, no reset on this LFO. It just gives out a pseudo-endless series of random notes. And it doesn't matter, again, because bassline is repeating random, drums are just repeating, no random in the drums. So that works this way. The output of the LFO sampled with this sample and hold. That is triggered by this clock. That's every 4 bars. So every 4 bars we get this little melodic spur. That's due to this AD envelope that is also triggered by this clock that has a long attack and an even longer decay. So that it's just a little bit of flowing melodic stuff. Yeah, that goes into the quantizer. Quantizer again goes into the slew rate limiter to give it glide. And there's actually a lot of glide here. And this feeds into all 3 oscillators that make up this sound source. There's actually a second cable that's fed into the quantizer, and that is the second channel of this sample and hold, which is fed by the first LFO output of the rhythm generator LFO. Let's call it that way. So there's actually lots of interconnections in the patch. I oftentimes like to do that, pull random, not random, but pull some elements from one part of a voice to another voice. In that case, I use the same or one of the LFOs that generates the rhythm here to generate a melody here, or part of a melody. Because what's happening, every 4 bars a new note is chosen based on this LFO output, and that is the baseline of the melody. And on top of that, there is a faster sequence. It's triggered by this 8th note pulse, 8th note clock. That is from this faster LFO, or is it even faster? I don't even know. Yeah, it is faster, but it doesn't matter. The values from the LFO are sampled faster. That's what I wanted to express. And that gives this nice moving melody that's always offset randomly and plays pseudo-random notes. Technically, this LFO is reset every 4 bars, or no, every single bar. So you can expect to receive the same notes here every bar, or every 4 bars when this AD envelope is triggered. But since it is offset by this LFO, the notes are different. And as you can see, this quantizer looks even more sparse than that quantizer. I removed the 7th. Yeah, apart from that, I left the scale as is. So we do not have the 4th scale degree and the 7th scale degree. Still an E minor scale. We have 2, 3, 5, 4 and the tonic. And by having mostly the same notes in the bass line and the lead line, I can somewhat force that they are melodically coherent, so they do not clash quite as often and sound somewhat related and nice together. If I chose vastly different notes here and different notes here, sometimes it's difficult to get them to sound nicely together, especially if you have different sources of the melody. Alright, where am I? Here. The actual sound source is these 2 micro FM operators that play at a higher octave. I think initially I had one of them even higher. Which kind of sounded odd, and I liked it at first, but it sounded too dissonant in the whole patch. Did not fit the bass line, did not fit the drums. So I tuned that back, and decided to just go with a little bit of fine detuning. So this is not a fine-tune knob, it fine-tunes the ratio. So this is now not 2, but 2.06 from the base frequency that's set here. And that just detunes those two oscillators to get some movement. These also have feedback fully turned up, one positive, one negative, so to get a saw-ish sound. And here the amplifier is not connected. This amplifier is connected to a simple DC offset because I wanted to have less of this oscillator. And there was a simple way to do that using the built-in amplifier. If nothing is connected to the built-in amplifier, it's just full signal. That's what this oscillator does. Both of them feed into this frequency shifter, but before they do that, they are being modulated by this FM operator that does linear through zero phase modulation on both of these. And since linear FM tends to go out of tune when there's DC offset in the signal, I enabled the DC blocker. And yes, also through zero linear FM does that, which makes sense if you think about it. If you add a DC offset to linear FM, even if the oscillator goes through zero, that's a DC offset on the frequency. So that's out of tune. And to avoid that, just add a DC blocker and you're good to go. Your oscillators stay in tune, even with heavy linear FM. Doesn't matter. If I remove that, doesn't matter. Yeah, it does matter a lot, because I changed the shape. Usually if you have the shape control on the very left side, well, let's do that real quick, then it's a sine wave. But there's 10 different shapes, and some of them are half rectified or full rectified, and half rectification, full rectification, that adds DC offset, because you're cutting away the negative part of the wave, so it's only positive, and yeah, that's DC, essentially. Is there anything interesting? No. Plays 2 octaves higher than the other oscillators. Apart from that, it is controlled by an AD envelope, the second AD envelope of this one, which again is triggered by the 4/1 clock. Yeah, that one. So the reasoning behind this is I want to have more interesting sound, but not full blast all of the time. I want this to decay. So when the melody decays, the overall level decays, the modulation also decays, which gives it that kind of natural timbre change. So if you think about real world sounds like a piano or something, you hit the key, there's a lot of frequency content, there's the transient, and there's lots of high frequency content, but that decays, and the low frequency content stays longer and decays slower than the high frequency content. And you can emulate that a fair bit if you let the modulation signals decay faster than the carrier signals decay. Alright, back to the frequency shifter. I really do like frequency shifters, because if you do not have them fully wet, get this kind of wobbly sound. Where's my... Here's... Okay, it's kind of hard to hear, but it just adds a little bit of flutter. and it's also mapped to a knob on my MIDI controller, so I can play with that when I jam. The rest of the patch, kind of boring. There's another amplifier. The volume envelope is the bottom one, the top one. Here is the sidechain, that's from the kick, so that the lead line is ducked when the kick hits. That's much less about cleaning up or making room for the kick, but more to get this ducking feeling, to make the rhythm more pronounced. When all is said and done in the amplifier section, it goes into a ladder low pass. I guess that's the common theme of this patch. So many ladder low pass filters. Yeah, it's just a great sounding filter. I have cutoff mapped so that I can control the brightness of this. And there's also CV on the cutoff frequency to get some movement. It's from the same LFO that creates the melody. Oh yeah, and the frequency shifter is also modulated by this, or one of the LFOs in that. Fair bit amount of drive. Just drive the filter hard. It's always good. It's not always good. Don't take that out of context. Just in that case it sounded great, and most of the times it sounds great. But there are cases where more distortion is worse. Usually more distortion is better, but there are cases, many of them. Just play with the drive knob and set it to whenever it sounds good. Add a little bit more, see if you like it. If you don't, pull it back. It's kind of hard to show you because this sound is playing so little. Whatever. Final part of the patch, Universe. That's the port of the Air Windows Galactic reverb. And that just washes out this melodic sequence. Just gives it a wash of notes, which makes it sound kind of ethereal. I like what that does to the melody. Kind of slurs it, washes it out, gives it space. And all in all, that works great with the rest of the patch. Let's hear it once again. If you look closely, you can see some of the knobs turning on the screen. It's because I turn them on my MIDI controller. I use a Fader Fox EC4. It's a great MIDI controller with lots of knobs that I can map easily. It's very cool. Quickly, what can I map? Resonance. Just MIDI learn. And it's learned. And here I have this MIDI panel open in Voltage Modular. See, if I turn up the resonance, the filter is self-oscillating. Maybe I don't want that, so I limit the max range, limit the minimum. Oh, that sounds actually quite nice. And I like to limit the ranges, especially for output levels. So, for example, this is limited to 50%, which is 0, because most of my level knobs are in both directions. So it goes from -1 to +1, so you can invert the signal. And if you want to have it silent, you have to turn it to 50%. And when I limit the minimum value of a knob, then I can just twist the knob and I do not have to worry that I land on exactly the value that I need. Because during jamming, during performing, it's very difficult to do precise adjustments. And this way I can just crank the knob and I land on exactly the value that I set previously. Guess there is not much more to talk about. So that's it. We just crossed the 1 hour mark anyway. There's quite a small patch if you look at it, but a lot is going on. I've used a lot of neat little tricks that I learned over the years. If I forgot something, please let me know in the comments. Or if you need more explanation on one topic or the other, also let me know and I will try my best to answer that. If you have any feedback, things I can do better in this patch explanation videos, then you already know. Please let me know in the comments. Apart from commenting, also please like and subscribe. That helps to spread the word and grow the channel. So yeah. Hope you enjoyed the jam. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. See you around.